Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 112 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. A quick note regarding last episode. I noted that, quote-unquote, our Earth is labeled as Earth Prime in pre-crisis DC. Post-52, Earth Prime is the main DC universe. I forgot to note that Marvel has named the Earth we live on as Earth 1218. Just another little piece of trivia you may enjoy. Moving on to this episode. As you may have heard, Marvel has a new show on Disney Plus starting March 30th titled Moon Knight. More mainstream media, and even some comic book websites, will simplify Moon Knight's description as Marvel's Batman equivalent. Starting in just 3 weeks, I'll be doing a deep dive on the Marvel show as it comes out week by week. But unlike our previous deep dives, this show's main character is one we haven't seen before in the MCU, nor have I discussed him in any of the previous episodes, and so I wanted to dedicate a show to the history of Moon Knight and why he's more than just Marvel's Batman. Moon Knight first appeared in issue 32 of Werewolf by Night, a redundant but trademarkable title. In that August 1975 issue, written by Doug Moench and drawn by Don Perlin, we meet mercenary Marc Spector, who is paid by an organization simply known as The Committee to put on a special costume they'd designed in order to capture the titular werewolf of the book, Jack Russell. Yes, the werewolf's real name is the same as a dog breed. Someone was having fun at Marvel. Using silver weapons, including spiked gauntlets and crescent-shaped throwing darts, Moon Knight was able to fairly easily take down Russell. However, when he saw the committee was actually working to exploit Jack and his sister, Marc turned on his employers and freed Jack. A quick note. The cover of this issue introducing the hero notes that he is clad in solid silver, and in the story we are definitively told that parts of his costume, including his gauntlets and boots, are covered in silver. I believe that his costume was originally intended to be silver colored, but since colors were limited back then, it was printed as white instead. And when his history was rewritten to no longer be werewolf-centric, which you'll hear about more in a second, the creators decided to make the costume white in-universe as well. It took a few years before Moon Knight got his own title, but he did get a 2-issue story in Marvel Premiere, and also showed up as a guest star in Spectacular Spider-Man, Marvel 2-in-1, and The Defenders. Based on the popularity of those stories, Moon Knight was given the backup slot in the Black and White Hulk magazine, with Doug Moench continuing as the writer and legendary artist Bill Sienkiewicz penciling those stories. Finally, in 1980, Moon Knight was given his own comic, with Moench and Sienkiewicz staying as the creative team for much of its run. Moon Knight's origin was updated and retconned for this book, as we're told that Marc had his friend and colleague Frenchie, real name Jean-Paul Duchamp, infiltrate the committee in order to discover and thwart their evil plans. Frenchie is the one who suggested hiring Marc Spector and also provided the committee with the costume, claiming to have designed it himself. This retcon was revealed in issue 3, while we got Moon Knight's true origin back in issue 1. Working as a mercenary in Sudan, Marc is hired by Raoul Bushman to help quell a rebellion in the North African country, where he also meets Frenchie. When the mercenaries come across a tomb that had just been unearthed by archaeologist Peter Alron, Bushman decides to loot the tomb and kill the doctor and his team, including his daughter Marlene. Marc decides this is a step too far, and is able to scare Marlene off before confronting Bushman. The two fight, with Bushman defeating Spector and leaving him for dead in the middle of the desert. Marc barely survives, crawling his way back to civilization, where locals take him to the tomb and place him in front of a statue of Khonshu, the Egyptian god of the moon. Marc appears to die but then come right back to life, claiming to have seen Khonshu himself and swearing to become his Knight of Vengeance. Even though Marlene believes this is a delusion Marc is under, she and Frenchie both join Marc as he moves to New York and starts his work as Moon Knight. When he does this, he sets up 2 alternative identities in addition to his Marc Spector and Moon Knight IDs. Stephen Grant is a wealthy investor, turning Marc's mercenary earnings into a small fortune, while Jake Lockley is a cabbie who has his ears to the streets. Marlene, now Marc's girlfriend, seems to humor Marc's change in personas, who chooses from day to day who he'll be acting as, depending on his needs. This is a status quo for most of Volume 1 of Moon Knight. And you can see in what I've described so far some of the surface elements that lead people to dismiss Moon Knight as simply a Batman knockoff. A rich man obsessed with vengeance, who has no superpowers but a number of themed gadgets, including a mooncopter shaped like a crescent moon, who fights crime at night, dressed in a cape and cowl. Even the name Moon Knight is similar to the Dark Knight nickname that Batman has. However, Moon Knight is much more complex than those simple surface elements, especially when it comes to his personality and his multiple identities, as you'll soon hear. The year after his original series was cancelled, Marvel brought him back in a 6-issue miniseries written by Alan Zelenitz and drawn by Chris Warner. In this story, we find Marlene is broken up with Marc as the stress of dealing with his multiple identities has become too much for her. Apparently, the stress was too much for him as well, as it's now revealed that Marc suffers from dissociative identity disorder. Although it's called schizophrenia in the book, the two are often mixed up in popular culture. This series also briefly gave Marc true superpowers, as his strength waxed and waned with the phases of the moon. While various writers have each given their own take on this concept, the idea of a superhero with multiple personalities has been one of the running threads throughout the many volumes of Moon Knight that have been published over the years. In Volume 6, writer Brian Michael Bendis introduced new alternative identities based on Spider-Man, Captain America, and Wolverine. 2 years later, a new writer stated that Spector didn't actually suffer from DID, but instead had brain damage caused by Khonshu linking his mind to Marc's, and this damage caused him to shift his personality to reflect different aspects of Khonshu's godly domains. It was this writer who also introduced the white suit and tie wearing version of the hero, calling himself Mr. Knight. I will not be naming the writer of those stories, for reasons I delineated in episode 61. Finally, in Jeff Lemire's stories, with a series of rotating artists, published in Volume 8 of the Moon Knight series, he synthesizes the two ideas into one, saying that Marc did suffer trauma as a child that caused him to suffer from dissociative identity disorder, creating his Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley personalities back then, and that this mental break is when Khonshu first reached out and created a connection between the man and the god, or godlike creature, depending on your interpretation. And that connection was strengthened years later at the tomb where Marc apparently died. Speaking of Khonshu and Marc's death, this is another aspect of the character that has been fleshed out over the years. At first, most of Moon Knight's companions took Marc's apparent resurrection as a happy coincidence and believed his encounter with Khonshu was simply a near-death hallucination. And readers were allowed to interpret it how they wanted, with Mensch originally leaving the experience vague enough to be read as either divine intervention or not. However, when the writer had Marc resurrected once again in Volume 3 of his title, accompanied by a statue of Khonshu exploding and magically reconstructing itself, the moon god's existence was confirmed both in-universe and to the reading audience. Since then, we've seen Marc die and be resurrected multiple times, and may be functionally immortal. We've also learned more about Khonshu, as the god told Marc he wants to use the hero as a host body and take over completely. In a 2020 Avengers story, he nearly did so, using Moon Knight to try to take over the world, supposedly in order to save it, but was defeated by the Avengers and is currently imprisoned by the Asgardians. Moon Knight is still active, with Volume 9 of his series being released as we speak, as well as an anthology book coming out soon titled Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood. Multiple characters have gotten this treatment in recent years, with books being printed in black and white with red highlights. In his current ongoing book, Moon Knight continues to fight crime in his suit and tie, as well as acting as a high priest of Khonshu, despite his Jewish upbringing. He's also, thankfully, in therapy to deal with the multiple identities that reflect aspects of Khonshu, which have been defined as the Traveler, the Pathfinder, the Embracer, and the Defender of those who travel at night. From the trailers and other promotional materials, it seems that the dissociative identity disorder will be an important part of Moon Knight's story in the upcoming show, and we'll definitely be seeing Marc, Steven, as well as Moon Knight in an adaptation of his original costume, as well as a dapperly dressed Mr. Knight. Come back in 3 weeks to hear me discuss the show in detail with my guest, John Mulhall, and see where it intersects with the comics. But first, come back in 2 weeks where I'll be celebrating 4 years of Welcome to Geektown. Continuing my annual tradition, I'll be looking at the ongoing history of the New Warriors, the team that my favorite hero, Speedball, has been a part of for almost their entire run. So, it's gonna be a little while before I get back to questions, but I'd really love to have a backlog ready to go when I do. So please, send me any questions you have that you'd like answered, or just let me know what you think of the show in general. Email me any and all of those to welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcometogeektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Lowitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips of the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.